let's go to Florida. Let's go to Miami, Florida, where Lewis Goodall is. It's where he is, preparing to cover the American election, which, of course, remember the 5th of November. Lewis, it says here you saw Trump and Harris supporters clash yesterday.
Yes, that's right, James. We were actually covering a Hispanic event, Republican Hispanic event in Miami-Dade County, which was a sort of get out of the vote operation. Not really actually for the presidential level, because Florida, for various reasons we might want to get into, has become less and less competitive presidentially. It's become more and more Republican. But there's a very important Senate race here, and there was a bit of an altercation, not physical, but certainly basically the Democratic candidate appeared at the same time, and you had this sort of extraordinary kind of scene of different sets of Hispanic voters basically sort of shouting at each other, sort of calling each other socialist or fascist or whatever it happened to be. And what was sort of interesting in itself, but what was astonishing about it in a way, or extraordinary about it, is that we realized later, at exactly the same time, of course, or pretty much it's at the same time, an hour later, Madison Square Garden in the Trump event last night, sort of closing rally event for him, there were, of course, all of these jokes being made about Hispanic voters, about Puerto Rico being a garbage island, and all of this sort of thing, a dump. And it sort of brings home to you the sort of one of the weird things about this election, which is, if most of the polling is to be believed, albeit not all of it, but if most of the polling is to be believed, Hispanic Latino voters are in increasing numbers moving to the Republican Party and moving to Donald Trump. And it's you've talked about this thing many times before on your show, when I was talking to some of the people, voters, and sort of party members out canvassing for him yesterday, and saying, how do you feel when you look back at the sort of things he used to say about, Mexicans coming, sending rapists and all that sort of stuff? And they say, well, he didn't say that. He didn't say it. It's like, no, but he definitely did say it. And, that's the thing, the sort of cognitive dissonance of that is still very, very profound. And so,
does it change? Do you think this rally is going to make any difference to anything, first of all, but to that in particular, specifically?
Well, clearly for people, as we know, James, clearly for people who have drunk the Trump kool-aid, and he's probably branded that, for people who are the most sort of resolute Trump backers, yes. Clearly not, because we just know
they love it. They love it all.
Realities.
Yeah,
I think that's right. It's just a sort of completely different reality, like it just doesn't go in. I mean, and that was the sort of weirdness of yesterday in a way. You ended up kind of putting the footage out later, but you've got these sort of Democrats and Republican sort of hyper-polarized people kind of absolutely screaming at each other, a sort of inch away from each other's noses, not obviously in any way internalizing anything that the other person is saying. And that is what American politics is, right? But in terms of whether the Puerto Rico stuff and the stuff at Madison Square Garden, whether it might have a slightly bigger impact on the relatively slender numbers of still undecided voters, I think yesterday was a reminder about some of the worst excesses of the sort of MAGA and Trump movement, right? You can hardly, any clips that emerge from it, when you're talking about the kind of racist sort of language or insults about political figures and so on, anyone who was wavering around Trump, it might make some difference around the edges. And let's not forget as well, just on the Puerto Rico thing, which might seem a modest thing in it of itself, insulting Puerto Ricans. There are 1.1 million Puerto Ricans living in Florida. There are 500,000 living in Pennsylvania. And of course, in an election by such fine margins, that sort of stuff does matter.
You're going to take us right up to the wire, actually, because you came on a little late as a consequence of my interview with Yulia Navalnaya. But what are you looking out for while you're there? As you say, the number of people whose votes are still up for grabs is vanishingly small, isn't it? Probably.
Yeah, indeed. James, the thing that we're trying to do in Florida this week is a little bit different maybe to some of the sort of traditional sort of pre-week polling, because pre-week sort of reportage, because in a way, as you know, you can do these elections and sort of go to swing states and so on. You can talk to 1,000 people, 10,000 people, but in an election which is so utterly as tight as it is, you, in the end, don't get much of a sense of it. The point of coming somewhere like Florida is to try and answer the question which I get asked all the time, and I'm sure you get asked all the time on your show as well, which is, how is Trump still in the race? This is what most British people looking at this race just thinks. Like, they look at it and like, given everything that has happened, both when he was president and since he's been left office, how can he still be in this race? And Florida is actually the place where one of the best places to answer that question, because it is basically the kind of conceptual home of MAGA and MAGAism. It used to be a swing state, but partly because of Trump and the effect that he's had on American politics, it has further and further move towards sort of Republican column and Trumpism. So the thing that I'm sort of trying to get my head around this week is not what's going to happen, because frankly, like, we'll find out in a week or so anyway.
Sure.
So what's the point in trying to divine it? But try to understand how he could still even be competitive given everything we know about him.
I should listen with interest. But podcast dropping every day?
Of course.
Of course.
Every day.
The news agents featuring Lewis Goodall, Emily Maitlis and John Soap.